Hello, my name is Dubs Weinblatt. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm the Associate Director of Education and Training of Metro New York for Keshet. I'm thrilled to be the host of Keshet's virtual series, Joy and Resilience, Jewish LGBTQ Leaders on What Sustains Us. As LGBTQ Jewish people, oftentimes we need to create our own ways of persevering through tough moments. Surviving and thriving in this world has pushed us to create our own store of unique wisdom about resilience, joy, and community. Each week, our team will invite a different Jewish LGBTQ community leader to join us in a thoughtful conversation about what sustains us and keeps us hopeful. With me today is my colleague, Emily Saltzman, who will introduce our guest.
Hello, everyone. As Dubs mentioned, my name is Emily Saltzman, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Associate Director of Education and Training here at Keshet. So excited to have Darren Sukonick here with us today, and I get to tell you a little bit more about him. So Darren is a lawyer and former partner at Torrey's LLP, who shifted to a new career as a principal at Matthew Sapera Fine Homes, a design build development company based in Toronto, Canada. Darren is an active community leader. He serves on the board of UJA Federation of Greater Toronto and its LGBTQ task force, and has held various senior roles in UJA's annual fundraising campaign, participated in Jewish Federation of North America's National Young Leadership Cabinet Program, and is one of Toronto representatives to the JFNA Board of Trustees, is a Toronto co-chair of the Canadian Friends of the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, is a board member and vice president for the membership committee at Holy Blossom Temple of Toronto, and is the president of Congregation Shirat Hayam, a pluralistic congregation in Nantucket, Massachusetts. Darren lives with his husband, Matthew, in Toronto. Welcome, Darren. It's so exciting to have you here. So as Dubs mentioned earlier, our conversation series is about joy and resilience. So tell us, Darren, what do those words mean to you, and how do they intersect?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this series. I'm so thrilled with all the different types of work that Keshet has been doing, and I'm honored to be part of this piece of their initiative. My name, as you said, is Darren. My pronouns are he, his, him, and joy and resilience is a great topic. Obviously, they speak to different parts of our experiences in life. And I would say that joy for me has been finding moments, occasions, relationships that bring me happiness, that make me feel fulfilled with what it is that I'm doing. And that has come to me, fortunately, in many ways over the years. Resilience for me has been dealing with challenges, and like everybody on this video, everybody who is watching this video, there have been challenges in each of our lives. My husband sometimes is fond of speaking of a certain people or certain family and saying, oh, they live this charmed life. And my response always is, nobody lives a charmed life. Everybody has challenges. Everybody experiences difficulties. We may not know about them. We don't know what's going on inside, but they do have them. And what we are seeing, if somebody appears to have more of a charmed life, is that they have figured out a way to adapt, to hold both the challenge and the recovery in the same hand, and to move forward with them. And so I've been privileged in that the challenges that I have had in my life are ones that I've been able to either overcome, either figure out ways to live with them and to integrate them into the person I am. And so I would say that to me, a true joy is a joy that is one that you're able to enjoy, despite the fact that it may have been forged in a bit of an oven of challenge or adversity, which helps build up the resilience you need.
Definitely,
Thank you for that, Darren.
I'm curious if you can give us an example of a moment where something felt, if you have this, a moment that felt really tough, and kind of like how you drew upon resilience, what you did to kind of persevere, and then did that turn into a moment of joy that you now hold close?
A great question. I experienced in my professional career as a lawyer a very challenging professional time of life. There was a client situation, not going to delve into the details, but it ended up going on for a long period of time and involved a lot of difficulties. The client was involved in some challenging business matters. I was dragged into it, and it really sidelined in many ways the career that I had been enjoying as a lawyer. It was a difficult time, very difficult, and I was going through it with one of my partners from the law firm. And during that time, we were able to draw strength from each other. We were able to draw strength from our respective families and other colleagues who had been supportive throughout. And it gave us the opportunity to not only confront what we had to deal with and to confront it with strength and with dignity, and to uphold values that we had in terms of loyalty to each other, loyalty to the truth and the like. But I would say that there were certainly periods of joy that came along with it. And I'll remember something very clearly that my partner, my law firm partner, said to me towards the end of the experience, as we were really reaching a stage of almost complete closure on it. And she said, one of the sad things I have about reaching this point of closure is that you and I will not be spending the same amount of time with each other in terms of dealing with this. And that really struck to the heart. She's not a sentimental person, but it really was a great encapsulation of saying that, yes, we had been through this trial, literal, figurative trial, and we had emerged it with a closeness to each other and a closeness to ourselves and our values, and there was joy in that. And the situation that happened professionally also pushed me forward towards switching my career to moving into Matthew Sapiro Fine Homes, as you mentioned, which is a company that had been started by my husband many years before we were together. And I now work side by side with him in this business, and that itself has resulted in a lot of joys. It's needed a fair amount of resilience too to work with your spouse, for anybody who's ever done that. But we forged ahead, and we've been successful in that business. And so that's another offshoot of getting through times of adversity and trying to find something positive to bring out of them.
Thanks so much for bringing that in. I think the kernel that I'm taking away from that is the experience of growing close and feeling connected to other people that have shared a similar challenging experience with you. And like, I have had that in my life. I have watched other people in my life connect over really challenging moments. And I don't know if I would say that we need those challenging moments always. I'm sure there's a few we could have gotten rid of. And at the same time, the friendship, partnership, and lasting connection that can sometimes be brought out of really challenging moments is really powerful and can sometimes sustain us in different ways after the event has taken place. I'm really glad you brought that in.
No, I think that you're absolutely right about that, and you brought to mind something else, if I can share. It was many years before that when I was had come out as LGBTQ and was beginning to explore how that expression of my identity would work through the various facets of my life, and particularly because I had always had a very strong Jewish identity and a very, very close network of Jewish friends. And so in exploring the being gay, it had its own additional layer of challenge in that not only are you dealing with a subset of a community at large, but within the Jewish community, you're dealing with basically a smaller subset in a sense, or smaller absolute numbers, maybe not smaller percentage, but smaller absolute numbers. And so it was tough to build together a group of true peers in that sense, people who were also gay, who were similar in age, demographics, because they were going through the same life type of stage, who I could relate to. And I was lucky that I did build up that group, and we became, friends, as many people become friends through connections with certain people. There were organizations that we ended up becoming affiliated with. One of them was a support group that was run by the Holy Blossom Temple in Toronto, and I would attend meetings of that with some of the friends. Later on, two of my friends started a different type of support group, which was unaffiliated with the synagogue, but was a method for Jewish LGBTQ in their 20s, 30s, and the like to come together and have discussions that were facilitated by a really incredible social worker who allowed us to explore the issues that we were dealing with in our life. And so those people that I met in my, let's call it, early 20s, which was decades ago, are people who I still share a real friendship and closeness with. And although we may not see each other on the same type of frequency that we did then, because the times have taken us to different places or different stages and the like, whenever we are together, there is a bond that takes us right back in time to those moments where those connections were forged, when we were dealing with some moments of vulnerability, and there were people around us who helped us to get through them, get past them, integrate them, and are people who I have a huge level of trust for in my life.
That's great. I mean, I think what you're really bringing in is, it sounds really cool that not only was there community-generated conversations, so that it sounded like there was a need that needed to be met. Folks worked together to figure out how to meet that need, and then new opportunities were created as a result of that first gathering. And so what I'm hearing from this story is that, the power of LGBTQ folks to make the medicine that we need to heal, that we can find those moments, that we can, through our own networks or through our own experiences, find the people to help bring us together so that we can create a stronger bond. And especially what you were saying earlier of trying to find folks like you and folks like you that were also in a similar time in their life, which can be really challenging, that there is so much power and great learning that can come from intergenerational conversations. And at the same time, there's such a need for peer connection, so that we can travel together, so that we can be working through some things with support, where we're all kind of generally on a similar path. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm wondering if this might be a good time.
Sorry, if I might interrupt one point on that, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. Yeah, please.
One thing that you mentioned that was interesting to me was, on the one hand, I agree that having these initiatives be driven by peers, but driven by people who are LGBTQ was very important. But a critical part of the success, certainly back then, and I think it still is a critical part of the success today, was the notion of what we might call now allyship, which wasn't a common term back then, or as some people like to reframe it, not just merely allyship, but accomplishship, to have people who are around us who may not have identified as LGBTQ in that sense, but they had such a strong passion for the notion of equality and the notion of inclusion. Again, before this is going back decades before these were terms that people were so familiar with, and they were there providing leadership, they were there providing a bridge, and they were a critical part of the success. And I think that they still are. These wonderful people are still a critical part of success, and that whatever plans we make, whatever advances we make, that they are with us on them, and I'm really grateful for them. There were wonderful people who were LGBTQ, who were not identified in that way, and they all were part of building the resilience in those days and today.
Totally. I mean, that's such an important point as well, that, while, our liberation is wrapped up in each other's, right? That we need each other in order to move forward, that we can't do this alone, that sometimes there are folks that have access to different structures or different conversations, and we need everybody. We need everybody involved so that we can continue to move forward. And I think you're bringing in the accomplice and the ally in this is so incredibly important, because we need that across issues. You know, we need that in the LGBTQ community. We need that when we think about racial justice, disability rights, and all different types of social justice issues, that we need to link hands and try our best to use what we got as we continue to move forward. So thanks for that important point. So I'm wondering if this might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about another really powerful experience that you had, was attending these incredible Passover Seders run by Holy Blossom in support for folks affected or infected with HIV and AIDS. And I know this was a while ago, so we're not going to, quote you on any of the facts, but, if there's anything that you could share with us about sort of the history of this, how this came about, and your experience with these gatherings.
Sure. So I wasn't involved on an organizing or a founding way, but I was an active participant for a number of years. And from what I know, a number of people who were connected to Holy Blossom Temple and connected to other community organizations came together and said, we should create a way for people who are LGBTQ, and particularly people who, whether they are or not LGBTQ, have been affected by HIV and AIDS, to get together in a Jewish moment and acknowledge the journeys they were going through, the difficulties they were facing, and to receive comfort and support from their community. And they chose to do this around the Passover holiday. They created what was called the Third Seder, which was for people infected or affected by HIV and AIDS. And it was held at Holy Blossom Temple, organized by a group of volunteers. And it was a Seder in every sense of the word. It included a social component, it included a meal, and it included a special text that had been developed in order to lead people through the Seder program. And it really attracted a diversity of people into it. It was people who had been very personally affected, some people who were suffering with HIV and AIDS. It included people who were family members. It just included people within the community who wanted to come out and to provide a show of support. And it went on for many years. And it was, I suspect for many people, including myself at that time, it was the first exposure that we had had to people who were going through this incredibly difficult time. It was, for many people, a wake-up call to the health crisis that was happening at the time, the health crisis that in many respects continues to this day. And it really did allow people to provide comfort and take comfort, and both parts of that equation are really equally important. People wanted to feel that they could give in some capacity beyond just, say, writing a check and supporting a charitable organization, and this gave them that moment. And I think for the people who attended, and most were Jewish, although probably not all, for the people who attended, being part of this type of LGBTQ event that happened within the walls of what many viewed to be a very small C conservative synagogue. It's Reform and affiliation, but is one of the oldest congregations in Toronto. It inhabits, a very established neighborhood within the city, within a very significant building, and to be able to walk through there and say, this organization is standing here at the forefront of these issues, I think that had a lot of impact on the people who were part of it. And interestingly, at the time, I was not involved in any way within Holy Blossom Temple congregation. And later on in life, when I met my now husband, he and his family had been members of Holy Blossom for generations. And so I ended up joining Holy Blossom Synagogue because of that relationship, even though my own personal connection with Holy Blossom had started, maybe 10 years beforehand through the Seders that I attended and the other programs there. And today, I've now become more involved with Holy Blossom. As you mentioned, I sit on the board of directors. I'm the vice president of membership. And I feel like that has given me, in turn, my opportunity to be able to give back towards the Holy Blossom community, both generally and both in terms of increasing the inclusiveness and the warm welcome that we show from members of the LGBTQ community, because again, it's not something that historically has been associated with the synagogue culture within most cities. And Toronto's no exception. In many cases, people would suggest that Toronto is an even more conservative type of community, but that's changing. And I think that we're seeing change thanks to hard work by a lot of people, but we're seeing change throughout our communal organizations. And Holy Blossom has been proud to take the steps forward. Sometimes they've been baby steps, sometimes they've been strides in terms of advancing that important part of our agenda of diversity and inclusiveness. And whether it's small gestures like changing our logo for Pride Month so that it incorporates a rainbow element, more personal gestures such as requiring that when people register events, they have an opportunity to indicate their preferred pronouns, and that pronoun forms part of their name tag logos, rolling that out in terms of our staff's email communications, or holding events like one that I was privileged to be a part of with rabbis who are exploring the textual basis for, in the warm embrace of LGBTQ population. There's a lot of different ways that a synagogue, a lot of different ways that all sorts of community organizations can try and make change. And change comes, but it's slow sometimes, or it feels slow sometimes.
Definitely. It's so important that you're bringing in this institutional role of being part of change. I know Darren because we have worked together through the leadership project through Keshet, and our first ever leadership project in Canada. And so it was the last time I traveled before COVID-19 was to the beautiful city of Toronto, and seeing this incredible, we didn't get a chance to go inside, but just being nearby and seeing Holy Blossom as this incredibly beautiful building that makes a statement that you can't ignore it on the street, that it's so beautiful and really is awe-inspiring, and at the same time, the incredible work that you can do in an institution that can ripple out into the greater community, and how that affects young people, individuals, families that may be having those questions themselves. And if the institution can help to drive that change, then great conversations can happen and even more folks can get involved. So it's really great to talk to you in this way, and also know that you're part of this legacy of shifting the narrative and continuing that conversation at Holy Blossom and in Toronto as a whole. So very exciting for institutional change conversations. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
I think, sorry, I was going to say one thing. I was going to say that, the opportunity to change organizations can happen in a number of different ways, obviously. What we're doing at Holy Blossom right now with Keshet, and generally speaking, in terms of our diversity and inclusion is wonderful, and it results from some very active efforts that are being made by people. I would say that for much of my involvement in different community organizations, I've taken a bit more of I'm going to call it a kind of a passive role, in the sense of what I've done is I've been part of these organizations, some very traditional, I'll call them kind of mainstream organizations, and I've been there as somebody who is LGBTQ, who is married, who is certainly not hiding any aspect of my relationship and my identity, but not necessarily advancing a particular LGBTQ agenda. And I think that's been good in some ways, because what it's done within these organizations is it's normalized the notion of participation. And certainly for me, I felt incredibly comfortable within those organizations. I'm going to just offer up one I can think of. There's a friend of ours, ours being mine and Matthew, who is associated with a synagogue that has a traditional Orthodox bent. The rabbi there is an amazing individual, and our friend hosts study sessions at his home for study sessions for men, led by the rabbi, and he's attracted this group of people who are not necessarily connected to the synagogue itself, are not necessarily strongly connected to Jewish synagogue life generally in any form. And when Matthew and I go to the study sessions, we are of 20, the only two LGBTQ, but we're there and we're participants in these discussions. And excuse me, these discussions cover a range of Jewish life issues, including Jewish relationship life issues. And I feel like having our voice in these rooms, even if it's not a voice stridently speaking forth about certain issues, is an important part of the mix. And people come away from it knowing or realizing that we are part of this mix, and we've always felt welcome within these types of discussions. And so I think that there are a number of ways to affect change within institutions. And no one is right, no one is wrong, and different ones are different times and different types of results.
Totally. And I think that's a really powerful point, that when we're thinking about change, when we're thinking about a movement, there's so many different pieces to that puzzle in order to push things forward. And the whole idea, the hope, right, is that LGBTQ people don't need to be the ones to be pushing LGBTQ inclusion, that we're all doing it. And that just because an LGBTQ person is involved on a committee, it's not their responsibility to be the LGBTQ voice. So that the hope is that we're attending things because we want to be involved in a project. We want to be involved in a community, and we also happen to be a member of the LGBTQ community. So I think that's what you're bringing in is such an important point as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and just like thinking back to a couple of the different parts of stories that you've been sharing, what keeps, and you all have both already kind of touched on it, but what's striking to me is this visibility in a way that we sometimes may not even think about. So the fact that Holy Blossom hosted these meetings in a conservative shul 25 years ago is like a really important foundation of visibility. Whether or not that was intentional, it still is giving the message that this is a space, this is a structure, this is a community that values every life and wants to hold space for folks. And so that's and kind of goes hand in hand with what you were saying too about what you both were just saying about just existing in a space and just being able to be present without any kind of agenda. So I might be putting words into Holy Blossom's mouth, but I don't know that there was an agenda other than holding space for people versus saying we are this space. And so that was kind of the vibe that I was getting from what you were saying. So just wanting to name again and just kind of reiterate how important what Emily was saying too, we all have to show up in all the different ways and how important that is.
I think you're right. I think certainly at that point in time, Holy Blossom wasn't thinking about these types of initiatives on some type of strategic basis or a branding basis. It was connected with the core value of doing good. And that core value of doing good encompassed a number of things that they were doing. And this was recognized as one of the important things that they could be doing within a community of people who were being affected. And I think that, like you said, very, very rightly so, there is the notion of having a seat at a table, a place in a room, and then that can expand, and it can be a voice, it could be a voice of a participant, it could be the initiatives of a leader, and you can move up and down a ladder. And it doesn't always mean to move up, because there are sometimes that it's just important to be sitting there and to be one of several, one of many who are there in support, as it is can be, you know, working nonstop to try and plan an event or an initiative.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times folks expect the LGBTQ person in the room to be the voice, to be the advocate, to be the educator. And I would say probably a lot of the time that's not the case. Like the LGBTQ person doesn't want that role. They just want to exist. So I would love to switch gears a little bit. And I'm wondering if there are any Jewish values or cultural practices that have helped you during tough times in your life.
Wow, that's a great question. I would say about a number of things. So I had the opportunity recently to speak with someone about my own background, my own evolution in terms of my Jewish religious observance. And I grew up in a family that would have identified itself as conservative, although we went and attended a very Orthodox synagogue, which was in many ways out of step with the type of lifestyle that we were living. And then later on in life, I decided to increase slowly and incrementally some of my own levels of observance. So I remember very important when I went away to university, to McGill, in my first year of residence, wanting to decide what was going to be meaningful to me in terms of observing kashrut. I'd always grown up in a home where my house was kosher, even though sometimes outside the house we would eat other things. What did that mean in a residence structure? And I reached the conclusion that, well, residence was my home and the cafeteria was my home. And because there was no kosher offering there, there was no good kosher offering there, I became vegetarian for that period of time. And that was a way of thinking every day about the meaning behind being Jewish for me in terms of keeping kashrut. Later on, before I became a lawyer full-time and I moved into what I'll call my first real home, I had to make these decisions again, decisions about kashrut and decisions about what it was that I was going to do and not do on the Sabbath and on holy days. And I made a decision that I was going to observe the Sabbath as much as I felt comfortably with, which for me meant not using devices, phones, email, or the like, and basically treating it as a day of rest. And I think that all of these rituals, and they are rituals, was a way of doing two things. One, it was reminding me on a constant basis about the grounding of my Jewish faith and the historical context in which that faith came into being. And the second thing was, particularly with the Sabbath and the observance of Sabbath and holy days, was in carving out a time which was not taken up by or fully occupied by work or endeavors or tasks or the like, but allowed for points of reflection. And sometimes those reflections happened in synagogue, sometimes they happened on walks because I wasn't using a car, and sometimes they would happen, while taking a nap in the afternoon. But there was a whole space that was there for those types of reflections to happen. And I think the last piece of the notion of ritual for me was the idea of maintaining certain aspects of flexibility and not letting the ritual become the ritual for its own sake, recognizing that the rituals are tied into values. And so sometimes the values, in fact, meant that the rituals had to be pushed aside, and nothing could be sort of more clear than this time that we're facing right now, where synagogues are not meeting in person, they're meeting in online spaces. And I had to make this decision as to whether I would change my view regarding the use of electronics on Sabbath and holy days, if that was the only way that I could participate in this communal gathering that was still happening with Holy Blossom Temple and other organizations. And I made a decision that I would, that I think that the aspect of being in prayer with others was very important to me. And so now I do use the laptop for that, and I'm okay with it. there's a tension. I, sincerely hope, like all of us, for a time where I can put that away, and that may not be a part of my experience. But for now, it's a contradiction that I'm prepared to hold in both hands. The fact that after services are over at 12 or 12:30, and I've attended a virtual online Kiddush and conversation, that's it. And I am not looking at the computer or my email or my phone for the rest of the day, and compartmentalizing the two in those ways. So I think there's a lot of ways to draw from faith and tradition in terms of creating the structure, meaning in a person's life. Obviously, the work that I do in community generally originates from notions of tzedakah, both financial support and justice, and originates in the idea of trying to do things for others. And these are not values that are exclusive to Judaism. I want to be clear. There are many faith-based organizations, non-faith-based organizations that embrace these same concepts. As you said before, we walk together in lockstep, arm in arm, on a lot of these issues. But I do think that they have a poignant expression for me within Judaism, and I'm glad to try and live those aspects of my life as well.
Thank you. I love the idea of thinking about like holding the two truths of keeping to like your ritual, but then also being flexible to still then accomplish that ritual, but in a new way, I think is a really important thing to lift up for folks who are listening, and for myself as well. So I don't want to do this, but I have to ask you our last question before we move into our last segment. So Darren, what gives you hope?
It's interesting that you asked the question, because recently someone who I'm friendly with, who is very actively involved within the LGBTQ community here in Toronto, who works in a professional capacity at one of our Jewish community centers and has been doing incredible work. He sent out a call to a number of people to produce these short video clips that we put together that are talking about what we look forward to in Pride 2021. What are our hopes for Pride 2021? And given how we are celebrating Pride 2020, which we are, I would say, doing the best we can, and I give a lot of credit to all sorts of organizations that have put together initiatives. But what do we do when we look ahead? And in recording the short video that I did, I spoke about my hope that when we get together in 2021, that we will have more fully realized our goal of embracing everybody within the LGBTQ community, so that regardless of the color of your skin, your religious affiliation, your religious connection, your socioeconomic background, that we can look around a space, and I hope it's a physical space, and we can see each other and we can hug each other, and we can say to each other, we are all in this together. We are part of one family of community. Like every family, we have differences and we have disagreements, and we have things that we will have to just hold at respect, and we may not get past that for a while, and maybe we'll hit understanding, and maybe we'll go further, but that we're all part of one group, and with a very big tent that can extend over a lot of us. And so I think that we're seeing some of that emerging already. I think that sadly, it often takes crisis to push forward progress. It's not ideal, but if that is the only way to get that progress, then we are going to have to accept the fact of the crisis and to use it as an opportunity, and to try and do the best we can. And we're seeing that with all sorts of issues around racial inequality that have occurred. We've seen it with all sorts of issues of inequality that have been heightened and highlighted by the COVID crisis, where people are not all being affected in the same way. And it's very different to self-isolate in a small apartment where your job's been furloughed, as opposed to isolating in a country house where you're just watching your portfolio go up and down. These are very different experiences for people, and we have to acknowledge them. And we have to acknowledge that there's so much to do in so many arenas. But for LGBTQ, I feel like there is growth, and if you look out to a garden, you look out to a forest, sometimes at the beginning, what you're seeing is little bushes here and there, little growths here and there, and then all of a sudden the years have passed and all of a sudden it's a canopy. And I hope that that can be what we see within our LGBTQ community, that the leaves have filled in, the brush is filled in, and we have created this beautiful canopy of plantings and flowers and the like that we can all enjoy.
Thank you so much for that beautiful image. Really thinking about gardens in a different way today, so thank you. So we're going to move into our closing segment. So just to close our time together, we're going to ask a series of short, silly questions for you to respond in kind of a quick fire fashion. You ready?
All right, hit me with some questions.
No problem. Okay, well, get excited. So here we go. First question is, what is your favorite food?
Chocolate in every single form. It can be something as silly as Nutella, or it could be chocolate cheesecake or brownies. If you open up my freezer right now, there are probably 4 different forms of dessert that have chocolate in them that are waiting to be enjoyed.
I'll be right over.
What is one piece of advice you'd give your younger self?
Try not to be so worried about things. A lot of things will end up working themselves out. They may feel very difficult at the time, but time and perspective will help you realize that they were important, but you were going to get through them.
Awesome. And finally, what's a word that makes you feel empowered?
Community. The notion of people not only being together, but strengthened through bonds of mutuality makes me feel that community can accomplish a lot of things.
Beautiful, beautiful way to end our time.
Amazing.
Thank you, Darren.
Thank you so much, Darren, for sharing with us today. And thank you to all of you for watching or listening. Visit us at keshetonline.org to check out resources, videos, and information about Keshet, and to support our work towards full LGBTQ equality in Jewish life. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really wonderful to be a part of this. And again, I want to congratulate you on all the amazing work that you're doing. I have been seeing it firsthand in the project that we're doing, Holy Blossom, and just hearing your insightful questions today and knowing that there are other people who are going to be able to share their stories, it's a wonderful thing. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Darren. Appreciate that.